after cleaning the entire house. My dad said, "You missed a spot," I said. Okay, quietly. But then I found his old letter hidden behind the couch. I spent the whole Saturday scrubbing the house from top to bottom. I vacuumed every corner, dusted every shelf, wiped down all the windows until they sparkled. I even organized the tools in the garage and cleaned the grout in the bathroom tiles. I wanted the place to look perfect for him. Since Mom passed away, Dad had become tougher, quieter. Everything had to be done a certain way, and it always felt like nothing I did was ever quite good enough. But today, I hoped maybe he'd notice the effort. When he walked into the living room, he didn't even pause, just glanced around and muttered, "You missed a spot," pointing at a faint smudge behind the couch. I froze for a second. That was it. No good job, no thanks. Just that. But instead of snapping back like I wanted to, I just nodded. "Okay," I said softly, swallowing my frustration, and moved to pull the couch away from the wall. That's when I saw it. A small envelope, dusty and yellowed at the edges, was wedged between the back of the couch and the baseboard. At first, I thought it was just some old receipt or junk mail, but something about it made me pick it up. My name was written on the front, in his handwriting, and below it, just 2 words for later. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the envelope for a long moment, like it might vanish if I blinked. It felt almost wrong to open it, like I was intruding on something not meant to be found yet. But curiosity won. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out a folded piece of paper that looked like it had been handled 100 times. It started simply, "If you're reading this, it means I haven't said enough, and I probably never will." My breath caught. It was his handwriting, raw and uneven, not like the tidy, measured way he usually wrote grocery lists or bills. This felt different, personal. He went on to talk about Mom, how losing her had broken something inside him, how he'd tried to stay strong for me, but didn't know how to show it without falling apart. "I know I've been hard on you," he wrote. "I didn't mean to be. Every time I saw you trying, I wanted to say something kind, something encouraging, but the words always died in my throat." I swallowed hard as the words blurred. He wrote about the times he'd seen me growing up, those quiet victories I thought he never noticed. The spelling bee I didn't win but studied so hard for. The time I fixed the lawnmower on my own. The way I held it together at Mom's funeral, even when he couldn't. "You're stronger than I ever was," he wrote. "And I'm proud of the person you're becoming, even if I don't always know how to say it." I had to sit down. This letter, this tiny, forgotten thing hidden behind the couch, was the first time I'd ever really heard my dad speak from his heart. Not with grunts or criticisms or sideways glances, but with words that carried weight and warmth. And then came the last line, just 7 words that changed everything. Please forgive me for not saying this. I folded the letter back up with shaking hands, holding it like something fragile. I had come looking for a smudge on the wall, and instead found the part of my dad I never knew existed. As I sat there with the letter in my hands, the living room around me seemed to dissolve. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with echoes of things I hadn't thought about in years. And just like that, the memories began to flood back, not like a montage in a movie, but slow, heavy, and real. I remembered when I was 9 and had a fever so high I could barely speak. Mom was already gone, and Dad was still figuring out how to be both parents at once. He sat by my bed all night, reading aloud from a book he didn't understand, just to keep me calm. He didn't say much then either, but I remembered the way he gently touched my forehead, again and again, to check if the fever had broken. I remembered the day of my high school graduation. Everyone else had a family taking photos, balloons, big smiles. Dad had shown up late and stood in the back. I thought he didn't care. But now, I recalled catching a glimpse of him wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his flannel shirt. I just hadn't let myself believe it meant anything. Then there was the night I turned 16 and stayed out late without telling him. He didn't yell when I got home, he just sat at the kitchen table, silent, a cold cup of coffee in his hands. I thought he was mad. But now, reading his words, I wondered if maybe he was scared of losing me too. The more I thought back, the more I saw the patterns I'd missed. His "you missed a spot" wasn't just criticism. It was the only way he knew how to engage. He showed love in fixing things, not saying things. A tightened bolt on my bike. A packed lunch left quietly on the kitchen counter before school. An oil change I never asked for. He had been talking all along. I just hadn't known how to listen. Holding that letter, I felt something shift deep inside me. All the resentment I had built up over the years began to melt. It wasn't sudden or cinematic. It was quiet, like the way morning light seeps into a room, soft, uninvited, but undeniable. I looked around the living room, the same space I had just scrubbed clean, angry that he hadn't noticed the effort. But now, the dust on the windowsill, the worn patch on the carpet, even the dent in the couch, they weren't just signs of neglect. They were pieces of a life. His life. Our life. And maybe, just maybe, I'd missed more than just a spot. Later that evening, I found him in the garage, tinkering with a box of old tools like he always did when he didn't know what to say. For a moment, I just watched him, his hunched shoulders, his aging hands working with quiet focus. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words were stuck in my throat. So I held up the letter. He didn't look up right away, but I saw the way his hands froze. The clinking of metal stopped. The air between us thickened with all the things we'd never said. Finally, he glanced at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something break behind his eyes, something softer, more human than I'd allowed myself to see. I wasn't supposed to find it, was I asked, voice trembling. He let out a breath, half sigh, half surrender, and shook his head. No, it was. Something I wrote when I thought I might not come back from surgery last year. I never mailed it. I didn't know how. That hit me like a punch. I hadn't even known how serious that operation had been. He'd brushed it off like it was nothing, just a quick fix for his heart. I thought you didn't care, I said, not even trying to hide the quiver in my voice. All these years, the silence, the orders, the "you missed a spot." I thought it meant I wasn't enough. He looked at me, then really looked. You were always enough. I didn't know how to show it. After your mom died, I wasn't just broken, I was scared. Scared I'd screw you up. Scared I already had. There was a long pause. Neither of us spoke. The air smelled of oil and sawdust, the scent of every Saturday morning I'd ever spent in that garage, arms crossed, waiting for him to notice me. And now he had. I read your letter, I said softly. Every word. He nodded. His jaw clenched like he was fighting to hold something back. I didn't think you'd ever see it. But maybe it's better that you did. In that moment, the walls I'd spent decades building up began to crumble. Not all at once, not dramatically, just one brick at a time. I walked over and sat beside him on the old stool, the same one I used to sit on as a kid while he fixed my bike. He didn't say a word, but he reached over and patted my back, the same way he had when I was 9 and burning up with fever. And in that quiet, clumsy gesture, I felt everything I needed to feel. Love, regret, healing. Finally, I saw him not as the grumpy, impossible-to-please man I'd resented, but as someone who had carried more pain than he knew how to put into words. And maybe that was enough. Over the next few days, something shifted between us, not instantly, but enough for me to notice. The silence that used to feel so heavy now had room to breathe. It wasn't just absence anymore, it was space. Space for healing. Space for words we were finally starting to find. One morning, as I was making coffee, Dad walked into the kitchen. He looked like he wanted to say something, but wasn't sure how. That was the thing about him. He was always better with actions than with words. But today, he tried. "I've been thinking about what you said," he muttered, looking at the floor like it held all the answers, "about how I made you feel like you weren't enough." I stayed quiet, giving him the space I'd always wanted for myself. He continued, "That wasn't fair. I thought being hard on you would toughen you up, make life easier for you later. But maybe all it did was make you doubt yourself. And me." His voice cracked at the end. I'd never seen my dad like this, unguarded. Real. I did doubt, I admitted, for a long time. But reading that letter, it changed something in me. I realized you weren't just hard, you were hurting. And I was too young to see it back then. He looked at me, eyes glassy. "I didn't mean to leave you feeling alone. I just didn't know how to be both your father and your friend." I took a breath. "You don't have to be perfect, Dad. You just have to be here. Honest. With me. That's all I ever really wanted." For a moment, we stood there, both of us a little older, a little quieter, but somehow more connected than we'd ever been. Then he said something I'd never expected. "Want to help me clean the garage this weekend? We can do it together this time. And I promise not to say you missed a spot." I laughed, the kind of laugh that breaks through years of tension. "Deal," I said. "But only if I get to tell you when you miss one." He smiled an actual, full smile. And in that moment, it was like we found each other again. Not as the dad who barked orders and the kid who quietly obeyed, but as two people finally brave enough to meet in the middle of everything that had once been unsaid. And just like that, the house didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. A few weeks later, I found myself back behind the couch, not cleaning this time, but placing something there. The letter. I had reread it maybe a dozen times since that day. Each time, it unfolded differently, revealing layers I hadn't caught before: regret, tenderness, fear, and maybe even hope. But now, it felt like it had served its purpose. I no longer needed to hold on to it like proof. The bond it awakened between my dad and me had already started to root itself in the quiet gestures, the way he waited to see if I'd join him watching a game, the coffee mug he started leaving out for me in the morning, the way he listened a little longer when I talked. We were still awkward, still learning each other. But the silence between us, it had softened. It no longer hurt. One evening, I caught him standing in the doorway of my room, holding an old photo. I recognized it instantly. It was of me, maybe 8 or 9, on his shoulders at a local fair. We were both laughing. The photo was bent at the corners, worn from being carried around. "I found this in my drawer," he said, clearing his throat like the words were caught there. "Thought you might want it." I took it carefully. "Thanks." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. In the days that followed, we didn't have some grand, teary breakthrough. There was no dramatic moment of complete healing, but healing didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it whispered its way in through shared chores, quiet dinners, and late-night nods across the hallway. One Saturday morning, while folding laundry, I caught him humming a tune I used to hear when I was a kid, something from an old record he loved. And somehow, that soft humming said more than 100 apologies ever could. It reminded me that under all the layers of distance and formality, there was love. A love that maybe had always been there, just buried under years of silence and misunderstanding. So no, things weren't perfect now, but they were real. And that was more than enough. I never did tell him I found the letter. I figured some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood, and maybe, in his own way, he already knew.